I think the scariest thing about going to surgery is worrying about the anesthesia. You get knocked out and then it's almost like that, you wake up. And when I woke up, I was like, what?
Today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different.
We are going to talk about our experiences with surgery.
Everyone's experience is completely different, but we thought we would share our own. I'm going to talk about the first time I went under general anesthesia. It was 3 days after my 18th birthday, so it was a fun birthday present to me. My surgery that I had was to remove a tumor that wound up being benign from the left Marcia, from the left breast. For me, the scary part about it was just finding it when I was 17 years old, going in for a routine physical and not really expecting anything. It was like my pre-college physical. We did like an ultrasound and everything to figure out like what it was, because at first my doctor thought it was a cyst, so they tried to drain it by sticking a needle in there, and then it didn't drain because it wasn't a cyst. Yep. So that was a little uncomfortable.
Like a little party balloon.
Yeah, and then I did an ultrasound to like figure out what it was. And so they're like, okay, we think it's benign. But my doctor was like, before we send you off to college, I just want to like get it out of there. And I was like, I'm fine taking it out. 3 days after I turned 18, I went to surgery. I think my mom and my grandma took me. And it was my like summer break right before going into college. They took me in to go get my own outpatient surgery. One thing that also made me a little sad is like, so I was checking in and she goes, oh, you're 18 now. You need a different wristband than the one that I gave you. Hold on, take that one off. And I was like, yeah, my birthday was 3 days ago. This is how I rang it in, by having a luckily benign tumor and going into surgery. But that just kind of like made me a little bit sad, because I was like, oh, she was the first person to be like, I need to treat you differently because you're 18. So kind of the scary things for me were waking up during surgery, and then also just being so exposed. Since it was on a body part that I considered pretty private, and I was young, I was a church kid, no one had seen my body before. And here, the people that were seeing it were these doctors that I like didn't really know. We like went through all of that, and you know, very normal, good at his job type man. And it was like, all right, like feeling okay about this. But then when you get into surgery, you see him in there, he's in his scrubs, he's in his mask, he has his glasses on, he's like ready to go. That's when you're like, oh, wait, this is something that is happening right now. And
there's no eject button.
And there's all these other people in this room that I've never met who are also about to see my body right now. I'll never even know their names. That was like freaking me out. So going into the surgery, first and last things I remember is just like having the anesthesia administered, being asked a question that I don't remember, and then all of a sudden I saw just kind of like some lights happening like through my closed eyelids. I started hearing people talking to me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm waking up right now. Like, this is my worst fear. So I kept trying to like fight it and go back to sleep. I wound up waking up, and then one of the nurses was like, we've been trying to wake you up for 45 minutes. You were sleeping so hard. Like, you were one of the hardest people to ever wake up. And I was like, oh my God, I thought that I was waking up during the surgery, because that's how much of a blink it feels like. Yeah. And I was like, oh, it's because I was trying to go back to sleep. That's why I wasn't waking up. They told my mom, like, she might feel a little woozy after surgery. She might not have an appetite for a little bit. And I, you know, get wheeled out. My mom's like, how are you feeling? You feel hungry? They told me you probably wouldn't feel hungry. I was like, I'm ready for a burrito if we want to go to Chipotle.
That's the worst thing you can do. You're like not supposed to do that.
So I ate a burrito. The recovery period, I have boobs that are like large enough to be jiggling if I'm like in a car. And so it was like any movement like that hurt. Like I remember my brother had just gotten a new car, and so we went for a drive in it. We went around the block. I was like, you have to drop me off. I can't ride in this car right now, because it was hurting. And so it was just like constantly having just an ice pack there. And like there was something like a little bit embarrassing about that, because it's like if friends or something were coming over, I didn't want to be like, hey Kristen, how's it going? Where I am currently, I probably wouldn't care, but at the time I was like an 18-year-old girl who like didn't have a ton of body experiences.
The most recent surgery I had was a laparoscopy. I had a cyst on my remaining ovary. I only have one because the other one was removed in a different surgery. We waited a full year to see if it would shrink, and it didn't. And actually it got bigger. It was a little scary because there was some risk of losing the ovary, and there was some risk of not being able to remove the cyst. When you only have one ovary left, it's like, on my last chance, They checked me in, brought me to a bed, and they had me get into a gown. And then they, asked me like, you didn't eat anything? And I was like, no, because I left signs all around my apartment in case I woke up in the middle of the night. Because you can't eat or drink anything before surgery.
You have to fast.
Yep, or else you will choke on it. And then I got an IV, and that's when they started my fluids and stuff. And after I had the IV in bed with my little surgery jammies, literally the first time a nurse asked me how I was feeling, I like burst into just uncontrollable sobbing. It was embarrassing. I had to hide under a blanket. I was crying so hard. I felt really stupid because like these people see this all the time. They had to rush IV me because they had to go get Brian because I was just like, I could not stop crying. I think that like I was really, really worked up about this for a long time because I knew starting like June of last year that it was a real possibility. And then September, October, I knew it was definitely gonna happen. And then I had 2 months to be like, hope this goes well. I spent way more time in the build up to it happening than the actual recovery. I was also worried about waking up during surgery. And she was like, do you have any concerns? And I was like, I'm worried about waking up. And she said to me, have you ever had any issues with any sort of anesthesia whatsoever? And I was like, no. And she was like, that never happens. And I was like, but I saw this Lifetime movie where it happened to 80 people. And she was like, it's so incredibly rare. And so because it's so rare, it's not a good reason to not get something done that you need to get done. And then the anesthesiologist, who was very nice, she said to me, so where do you want to go today? And I was like, I feel like I'm having surgery, so that's where I'm gonna go. And she's like, no, because I'm gonna put you under. Where do you want to go? Like, do you want to go to Hawaii? And I was like, I don't think you're gonna send me there, but all right, sure. I think it's supposed to be like meditation, like it's supposed to be like very soothing. And they kind of like, they roll you into a room that's very metal and very scary. And then there's lots of people in there and they're all like, hey, and you're like, what's up? I'll never see any of you again.
But here's my body.
Here's my body. And then they lift you from one gurney onto the surgery table. And then they say, okay, we're gonna put in the stuff now. And then I don't remember anything after that. By the time I actually remember waking up, people were no longer relieved and they were starting to get annoyed. So when I woke up, I was like, do I still have an ovary? And Brian was like, yes. And I said, great. And then like 5 minutes later, I asked him, do I still have an ovary? And he said, yes, you do. And I said, great. 10 minutes later, I was like, can I see the doctor? I need to know if I still have an ovary. And he was like, you do. The doctor's gonna come. And then she came and then she told me. And then I was quiet for 7 minutes. And I was like, Brian, do I still have an ovary? And that's when I remember him being like, yes, do I need to write it down? I was like, no, you don't have to get mad at me. And then they have to wheel you out because they won't let you walk out. I was feeling good on the way home. And I felt good for the first half of Saturday. And then I felt like for 6 days.
It takes a while like for the anesthesia to like fully wear off, but when they do wear off, you feel it. Since my tumor was benign, I was like very, very thankful. There are many people who do have tumors that are not benign like mine was. And so it just made me think, what if it was malignant? And so then it was from that point forward where I was like, oh, if I want to do something or if I'm scared to do something, I'm just gonna do it.
I think a lot of people put off having surgeries that they may need or may avoid seeing doctors because they're afraid. And we're here to tell you, we have come out the other side.
Don't be afraid to do something if it's what your body needs.
Just do it, do it, do it, do it, do it.
Do it.
Hey, Unsolved is on a new channel, and now your part.
Subscribe here. That was my part.